The escape pod hit the orange sands of Prime with a terrible sound that shook every bone in Danny Carter's body. He felt his teeth rattle and his spine compress as the small vessel bounced twice before coming to a stop. Warning lights blinked red and yellow all around him, then one by one they died. The emergency beacon made a weak sound, flickered with hope for a moment, and then fell silent forever. Danny sat there in the darkness for a long time. His hands were shaking. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst from his chest. He could smell smoke and burning metal. He could taste blood in his mouth where he had bitten his tongue during the crash. Slowly, painfully, he unfastened his safety harness and crawled toward the hatch. The metal was hot to the touch, but he pushed through the pain and forced it open. Bright purple light flooded into the pod, and Danny had to cover his eyes with his arm. When his vision cleared, he saw a world of sand and rock stretching in every direction. Two suns hung in the strange purple sky, one larger than the other, both of them pouring heat down upon the barren landscape. There were mountains in the distance, their peaks jagged like broken teeth against the horizon. Danny pulled himself out of the pod and fell onto the sand. It was hot enough to burn through his torn flight suit. He forced himself to stand and looked back at the wreckage that had carried him to this place. The pod was ruined. Half of it had crumpled like paper during the impact. Smoke rose from cracks in its hull, and worst of all, Danny could see his water ration pack hanging from a broken storage compartment. It had been punctured during the crash. The precious liquid had already soaked into the sand and vanished. He had no water, he had no food, he had no way to call for help. Danny Carter had been a cargo specialist aboard the freighter called Wandering Hope. It was not a glamorous job. He spent his days counting boxes, checking manifests, and making sure that shipments reached their proper destinations. He was not a soldier, he was not a pilot. He was just a regular man who had taken a job among the stars because Earth had nothing left to offer him. The raiders had come without warning. One moment the Wandering Hope had been cruising through empty space, and the next moment alarms were screaming and the hull was shaking from weapons fire. The captain had ordered everyone to the escape pods. Danny had run through smoke-filled corridors, stepping over the bodies of he had shared meals with just hours before. He had made it to a pod, he had launched, and then he had watched through a tiny window as the Wandering Hope broke apart in a ball of fire and debris. He did not know if anyone else had survived. He did not know if the other pods had made it to safety or had been shot down by the raiders. All he knew was that he was alone on a desert world with nothing but the clothes on his back. The first day, Danny walked toward the mountains. He thought that maybe he could find shade there or perhaps a cave where water might have collected. The twin suns beat down on him without mercy. Sweat poured from his body, and he knew that he was losing water than he could afford. He tore strips from his flight suit and wrapped them around his head to protect himself from the worst of the heat. He walked with his eyes half closed against the glare. His boots sank into the sand with every step, making the journey twice as hard as it should have been. By the time the suns began to set, Danny had not reached the mountains. They seemed just as far away as when he had started. He collapsed behind a large rock and waited for the cool of night. But the night brought its own problems. The temperature dropped so fast that Danny found himself shivering. His sweat-soaked clothes turned cold against his skin. He curled into a ball and tried to sleep, but every sound made him jump. He did not know what creatures might live on this world, what predators might be hunting in the darkness. The second day was worse. Danny's lips had cracked and begun to bleed. His tongue felt thick and dry in his mouth. His vision swam and blurred, making it hard to tell what was real and what was a trick of the heat. He kept walking. He did not know what else to do. Stopping meant dying. Moving meant there was still a chance, however small. By the afternoon of the second day, Danny started seeing things that were not there. He saw pools of water that vanished when he reached them. He saw his mother standing in the distance, calling his name, but when he ran toward her, she faded like smoke. He saw the faces of his dead in the swirling sand. He fell many times. Each time it became harder to get back up. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. His arms were too weak to push himself off the ground. On the third day, Danny could barely lift his feet. He shuffled forward more than walked, dragging his boots through the sand. His thoughts had become slow and confused. He could not remember why he was walking or where he was trying to go. He only knew that he had to keep moving. And then he saw it. At first he thought it was another trick of his dying mind. A shimmering shape on the horizon that looked like buildings, like walls, like some kind of settlement carved from the red rock of this terrible world. But it did not vanish as he moved closer. It grew larger and more solid. He could see gates made of dark metal. He could see towers rising above the walls. He could see movement on the battlements, figures that were too large to be human. Hope sparked in Danny's chest for the first time in 3 days. He tried to run, but his body would not obey. He stumbled forward, crawled, pulled himself along the sand with bleeding fingers. 300 meters from the gates, his strength finally gave out. Danny collapsed face down in the sand. He tried to call for help, but his voice was nothing more than a dry whisper that the wind carried away. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was a massive shadow falling over his body. Someone was standing above him, blocking out the terrible suns. Someone had found him. Then Danny Carter closed his eyes and knew nothing more. Danny woke to darkness and the feeling that someone was watching him. His eyes opened slowly, painfully, and for a moment he could not remember where he was or what had happened to him. His body ached in ways he had never experienced before. Every muscle felt like it had been beaten with stones. The chamber around him was carved from red stone, smooth and ancient. Strange fungi clung to the walls, glowing with soft blue and green light that cast dancing shadows across the floor. The air was cool and smelled of earth and something sweet that Danny could not identify. He was lying on a bed made of soft animal skins. Someone had removed his torn flight suit and dressed him in a simple robe of rough cloth. Someone had cleaned the sand from his wounds and wrapped bandages around his cracked and bleeding hands. And someone was standing in the corner of the room, watching him with eyes that glowed like pools of molten gold. Danny's breath caught in his throat. The figure stepped forward into the light, and he saw her clearly for the first time. She was massive, nearly 4 meters tall, with shoulders as broad as a doorway and arms thick with muscle. Her skin was the of burnished copper, smooth and gleaming in the fungal light. Her hair was black and hung in thick braids down her back, decorated with small bones and metal rings. She wore armor made of leather and dark metal that covered her chest and shoulders but left her powerful arms bare. She was the most terrifying and beautiful thing Danny had ever seen. "You are awake," she said. Her voice was deep and rumbling like distant thunder rolling across the mountains. "Good, the elders will want to see what the desert brought us." Danny tried to speak, but his throat was still dry and raw. No sound came out except a weak croak. The giantess noticed and reached for something on a nearby table. She handed him a vessel made of carved stone filled with cool, clear water. Danny drank greedily, letting the precious liquid wash down his throat and fill his empty stomach. Some of it spilled down his chin, but he did not care. He had never tasted anything so wonderful in his entire life. "Thank you," he managed to rasp when the vessel was empty. "I am Danny Carter, human. My ship was attacked by raiders and I crashed here. I did not know anyone lived on this world." The giantess tilted her head and studied him with those golden eyes. Her expression was somewhere between curiosity and disappointment, like a child who had unwrapped a gift and found something other than what they had hoped for. "I know what you are," she said. "We have seen your kind before, small, fragile, easily broken." She crossed her arms over her armored chest. "I am daughter of the chief, and you are a problem." Danny did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He simply sat there on the bed of animal skins and waited for her to explain. Led him through winding tunnels carved deep into the rock. The settlement was far larger than Danny had imagined, a maze of chambers and passages that seemed to go on forever. They passed other giants along the way, males and females who stopped to stare at the small human with expressions of surprise and confusion. As they walked, explained the situation. Her people were called and they had lived on this world for thousands of years. They were warriors, proud and strong, who had fought many battles against many enemies, but now they faced a threat unlike any they had encountered before. The raiders had been attacking Prime for several years now. At first the raids had been small, just a few ships striking isolated settlements and then fleeing back into space. But the attacks had grown bolder and more frequent. They had better weapons, better ships, better technology. They were strong, but strength alone could not stop plasma rifles and orbital bombardments. In desperation, they had called upon an old pact with something called the Galactic Trade Federation. They had requested human soldiers as advisors, warriors who could teach them modern tactics and help them prepare for the coming war. "The Federation promised us too," said as they walked. "Strong ones, fighters, soldiers who have seen many battles and survived." She glanced back at Danny with a smirk that showed teeth as white as bleached bone. "You are neither." Danny felt his face grow hot with embarrassment and anger. "I never said I was a soldier. I was a cargo specialist. I counted boxes for a living." "Yes," said, "I can tell." They reached a large chamber lit by dozens of glowing fungi. In the center of the room was a table made of dark stone, and on that table lay a man that Danny recognized. It was Pete, the security officer from the Wandering Hope. Pete was a big man by human standards, with arms thicker than Danny's thighs and a chest like a barrel. He had served in the military before taking the job on the freighter, and everyone aboard had known that he was not someone to cross. Pete was unconscious, strapped to the table with leather bands around his arms and legs. His face was pale and his breathing was shallow, but he was alive. "We found this one in another metal shell 2 days before we found you," said. She walked around the table, studying Pete with open appreciation in her golden eyes. "He was in better condition. He will recover soon." She reached down and ran her copper fingers along Pete's muscular arm, feeling the strength beneath his skin. "This one has meat on his bones," she said with satisfaction. "This one can fight. This is the one I requested." She looked back at Danny and grinned. "You are not my choice. I asked for the meaty one." Danny stared at the giantess for a long moment. He thought about everything he had been through, the crash, the desert, the 3 days of walking through hell while his body slowly died of thirst. He thought about how close he had come to dying, and how he had been saved only to be told that he was not wanted. "Gee, thanks," he said flatly. "Glad I could be your consolation prize." Laughed. It was a deep, booming sound that echoed off the stone walls. "You have spirit, little human. That is good. You will need it." She turned and walked toward the door. "Rest now, eat, drink, recover your strength. The elders will decide what to do with you in the morning." She left Danny alone in the chamber with the unconscious Pete. He stood there for a long time, looking at the big man on the table, feeling small and useless and very far from home. But somewhere deep inside him, beneath the fear and exhaustion and doubt, a spark of determination had begun to burn. He had survived the crash. He had survived the desert. He had not come all this way just to be dismissed as worthless by a woman who did not even know him. Danny Carter was going to prove them wrong. He did not know how yet, but he was going to find a way. The weeks passed slowly in the underground settlement of the. Danny learned the rhythms of life among the giants, the times for eating and sleeping, the hours of training and the hours of rest. He learned which tunnels led where and which chambers were forbidden to outsiders. He learned the names of the warriors who guarded the gates and the workers who tended the fungal gardens that provided both light and food. Pete recovered quickly from his injuries. Within days of waking, he was on his feet, and within a week he was training alongside the warriors. The big man took to his new role with enthusiasm. He sparred with giants twice his size and held his own. He demonstrated human fighting techniques that amazed them with their speed and efficiency. He studied their ancient weapons and found ways to improve them. Watch Pete with something approaching admiration. She often stood at the edge of the training grounds, her golden eyes following his movements as he ducked and weaved and struck. Sometimes Danny saw her smile when Pete landed a particularly clever blow. Sometimes he heard her laugh when Pete made a joke in his broken attempts at the language. Danny, meanwhile, was given the task of maintaining the settlement's water filtration systems. It was menial work, the kind of job given to someone considered useless for anything else. He spent his days checking pipes and cleaning filters, making sure that the precious water flowed freely to every part of the underground city. They did not hide their disappointment in him. They had asked for 2 warriors and had received 1 warrior and 1 small, fragile human who counted boxes. When they looked at Danny, he could see the pity in their eyes. When they spoke to him, their voices were gentle and slow, as if they were addressing a child. But Danny did not complain. He did his work without protest, and when his work was done, he explored. The settlement was ancient, far older than Danny had first realized. The tunnels had been carved by hands that were not, using tools that the current inhabitants did not understand. Strange symbols decorated the walls in places, writing in a language that no one could read, and scattered throughout the deepest chambers were machines. The machines with dormant power. They were made of crystal and metal, smooth and beautiful in ways that human technology could never match. They called them the gifts of the builders, and they treated them as sacred relics. To touch them was forbidden. To tamper with them was punishable by death. Danny studied the machines from a distance at first. He memorized their shapes and the patterns of the symbols etched into their surfaces. He noticed how the crystal components glowed faintly when he stood near them, as if responding to his presence. He observed the way the priests would perform rituals before the machines, chanting prayers to gods who had vanished long ago. And slowly, carefully, Danny began to understand. The machines were not magic. They were technology, advanced beyond anything he had seen, but technology nonetheless. The crystals were some kind of computing system, storing and processing information in ways that silicon chips could never match. The symbols were not prayers or decorations, but instructions, a user interface waiting for someone who could read it. Danny spent every free moment studying the machines. He their connections, traced the pathways of power that linked them together, learned to recognize the subtle differences between components. He did not touch them, not yet, but he came to know them as well as he knew the cargo manifests he had once spent his days memorizing. One night when both moons hung full in the purple sky above the settlement, Danny went to see the chief. Was old by standards, his copper skin weathered and scarred from centuries of battle. He ruled his people from a throne carved from a single block of obsidian, his golden eyes still sharp despite his age. When Danny approached, the old giant studied him with an expression of weary patience. The small human said, "You have come far from your water pipes, what do you want?" Danny stood as tall as he could, which was still barely taller than seated knee. "I want to help your people." The chief laughed, and the sound was not kind. "You want to help? And how will you do this, little one? Will you count our enemies until they die of boredom? Will you organize our supplies until they flee in confusion?" "Your people are strong," Danny said, the mockery, "but strength alone will not stop plasma rifles and orbital bombardments. They have technology that makes your weapons look like children's toys." He paused, gathering his courage. "But you have weapons too, weapons you do not even know how to use." Eyes narrowed. "You speak of the gifts of the builders. I speak of machines that could save your people. Shield generators, power systems, maybe even weapons that could match anything they possess. They are sitting in your deepest chambers, gathering dust, while your enemies prepare to destroy you." The chief was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was dangerous and cold. "To tamper with the gifts is forbidden. The builders left them in our care, and we have kept them safe for 10,000 years. We will not allow an outsider to defile them." "And when they come with their warships," Danny asked, "when they burn your settlement to ashes and kill everyone you love, will tradition protect you then? Will your sacred laws stop a single plasma bolt?" The chamber fell silent. Danny could feel the eyes of the guards upon him, could sense their hands moving toward their weapons. He had spoken boldly, perhaps too boldly, to the ruler of an entire people, but did not order his guards to strike. Instead, the old giant leaned forward on his throne and studied Danny with new interest. "You are bold for one so small," he said slowly. "Very well, I will allow you to study the gifts of the builders. You may try to unlock their secrets." He raised one massive hand before Danny could respond. "But understand this, little human. If you fail, if you damage the sacred devices in any way, your life is forfeit. You will be executed in the old manner, thrown from the highest cliff to feed the sand beasts below." Danny swallowed hard. His hands were shaking, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "Fair enough. Once, then we have a wager. Go, little human, show me what your kind can do." Danny bowed and turned to leave. As he walked out of the throne room, he felt the weight of every eye upon him. He had been given a chance, a single chance to prove his worth. If he succeeded, he might save an entire civilization. If he failed, he would die screaming as he fell to his death. But at least he was no longer just the small one who counted boxes. At least now he had a purpose. There came on a night when both moons hung full and bright in the purple sky above Prime. They screamed through the atmosphere like falling stars, trailing fire and smoke as they descended toward the settlement. The sound of their engines was like the roar of 1,000 hungry beasts. Danny was deep in the tunnels when the attack began. He had spent weeks studying the precursor machines, mapping their systems, learning their language. Every night he descended into the deepest chambers and sat before the crystalline devices, watching the patterns of light that flickered within their depths. Every day he filled notebooks with observations and theories, trying to piece together the puzzle that the ancient builders had left behind. He had made progress, slow, painful progress, but progress nonetheless. He understood now that the largest machine, the one at the center of the deepest chamber, was some kind of power generator. It drew energy from the planet itself, from the heat of its core and the radiation of its twin suns. The smaller machines connected to it like branches to a trunk, each one serving a different purpose. One of them, Danny had realized just days ago, was a shield generator. The alarms began to sound throughout the settlement, deep booming horns that echoed through every tunnel and chamber. Danny heard running footsteps above him as the warriors rushed to their positions. He heard the clash of weapons being drawn and the shouted orders of commanders for battle. He should go up, he should find a place to hide, some deep corner where they would never find him. He was not a warrior, he could not fight. The sensible thing would be to let Pete and the others handle the battle while he kept himself safe. But Danny did not run. Instead, he turned back to the machines and began to work. Above ground, the battle had already begun. They landed outside the settlement walls, their hatches opening to disgorge hundreds of armored raiders. There were ugly creatures, scaled and sharp-toothed, with 4 arms that ended in clawed hands. They carried plasma rifles that glowed with deadly green light, and they advanced toward the gates with the confidence of predators who knew their prey was helpless. Pete stood at the front of a captured plasma rifle in his hands and a grin on his face. Weeks of training had transformed him from a simple security officer into something more, a leader who commanded the respect of warriors 3 times his size. He shouted orders in Broken, directing fire toward the advancing enemy, coordinating them with a skill that surprised even himself. Fought beside him, her massive war axe cutting through armor like it was paper. She was beautiful in her violence, a copper goddess of death who danced through the battlefield leaving broken bodies in her wake. When she and Pete fought back to back, they seemed unstoppable, two warriors from different worlds united against a common enemy. But there were too many. For every raider that fell, two more took its place. They kept coming, wave after wave of reinforcements pouring onto the battlefield. They were strong, but they could not be everywhere at once. Gaps began to appear in their lines, warriors began to fall. A plasma bolt struck the gate, and ancient metal groaned and buckled. Another bolt hit the wall, blasting chunks of stone into the air. They had brought heavy weapons, siege equipment designed to crack fortifications far stronger than anything they had built. Pete fell back, blood streaming from a wound on his arm where a blade had found its mark, caught him before he could collapse, her golden eyes wide with concern. "We cannot hold them," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "There are too many." Pete shook his head. "We have to try, we have to give Danny more time." Stared at him, the small one. "What can he do?" "I do not know," Pete admitted, "but he asked me to buy him time. He said he had a plan." He grinned despite the pain, despite the blood, despite the death all around them. "And I trust him." Deep in the tunnels, Danny worked with desperate speed. His hands flew across the crystalline interfaces, inputting commands that he had only half figured out. The machines responded to his touch, lighting up with patterns that shifted and changed as he worked. Power flowed through conduits that had been dormant for 10,000 years. He made mistakes. He had to restart several times when the systems rejected his commands. Sweat poured down his face and his heart pounded so hard he thought it might burst. Above him, he could hear the sounds of battle growing closer. They were breaking through. Time was running out. And then suddenly he understood. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place in his mind, and Danny saw the system as a whole for the first time. He saw how the power flowed, how the components connected, how the shield generator could be activated with a single command. He slammed his palm against the activation matrix. For a moment, nothing happened. Danny stood there in the blue glow of the ancient machines, his hand pressed against the crystal surface, his breath caught in his throat. Had he failed? Had he made a mistake somewhere in his calculations? Then the chamber began to hum. The vibration started deep, so low he felt it in his bones before he heard it with his ears. The crystals around him blazed with sudden light, brighter than he had ever seen them. Power surged through the system, racing upward through conduits buried in the stone, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. Above ground, the battle stopped. A dome of shimmering energy had sprung up around the entire settlement, a barrier of light that stretched from the ground to the sky. The plasma bolts struck the shield and dissipated harmlessly, their deadly energy absorbed and scattered. They tried to fly over the barrier and found themselves pushed back by an invisible force. The raiders screamed in frustration. They fired again and again at the shield, but their weapons were useless. Some tried to rush forward to push through the barrier by sheer force, but the shield threw them back like toys. Pete looked up at the dome of light and laughed out loud. "He did it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "The crazy little man actually did it." Stared at the shield with her mouth hanging open. Then she turned to Pete with new understanding in her golden eyes. "The small one," she whispered, "he saved us." The warriors surged forward. With the shield protecting them from ranged attacks, they could fight on their own terms. They poured through the gates and fell upon the confused with all the fury of their ancestors. Led the charge, her war axe singing through the air, her voice raised in a battle cry that echoed across the battlefield. They broke and ran. They lifted off in panic, leaving their ground forces behind to be slaughtered. By the time the sun rose over Prime, the battle was over. The settlement had been saved. And deep in the tunnels below, Danny Carter sat slumped against the ancient machines, exhausted beyond measure but smiling. He had done it. The small one who counted boxes had just won a war. The celebration lasted for 3 days and 3 nights. They knew how to their victories, and this victory was greater than any in living memory. They had not just defeated the raiders. They had broken them, sent them fleeing back into the stars with their tails between their legs and their pride shattered. The underground chambers rang with music and laughter. Warriors danced around roaring fires, their copper skin gleaming with sweat and ceremonial paint. Great barrels of fermented fungal wine were opened and passed around until even the most serious elders were singing songs of glory. Danny stood at the edge of the celebration, watching from the shadows of a carved stone pillar. He was tired, more tired than he had ever been in his life. The activation of the shield generator had drained something from him, some vital energy that he was still trying to recover, but he did not mind. For the first time since the crash, he felt at peace. He watched as Pete was brought forward to the center of the gathering. The big man was still healing from his wounds, his arm wrapped in bandages and his face marked with bruises, but he stood tall and proud before the assembled. Chief rose from his obsidian throne and descended to meet him. Pete, the old giant said, his voice carrying across the chamber, "You came to us as a stranger, you fought beside us as a brother, you bled for our people and asked nothing in return." He reached up and removed a circlet of braided metal from his own brow. "Today were you as one of us." Placed the circlet upon Pete's head, and the crowd roared with approval. Stepped forward from among the warriors, her golden eyes shining with pride. She took Pete's uninjured hand in her own massive grip and raised it high. "A hero of the," she declared, "now and forever." Danny smiled and clapped along with the others. Pete deserved this moment. He had fought bravely when fighting was needed, had led the when leadership was needed, had held the line long enough for Danny to complete his work. Without Pete, the shield would have meant nothing. That would have overwhelmed the settlement before Danny could activate it. The celebration continued, and Danny was content to remain in the shadows. He did not need recognition, he did not need glory. He had proven something to himself, and that was enough. But had not forgotten him. She broke away from the celebration and crossed the chamber to where Danny stood. Her massive form blocked out the firelight, casting him in shadow. For a moment she simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You saved us," she said at last. Her voice was softer than he had ever heard it, lacking the mockery and dismissal that had their earlier interactions. Danny shrugged, trying to appear casual despite the way his heart was pounding. "I just pushed a few buttons. You and Pete did the real fighting." Shook her head slowly. "Do not diminish what you did. The gifts of the builders have been silent for 10,000 years. Our priests prayed before them, our scholars studied them. None could unlock their secrets." She paused. "You understood what our people could not. You saw value where we saw only relics." "I got lucky," Danny said. "I made a lot of guesses, most of them were wrong. But enough of them were right." Was quiet for a moment, her golden eyes searching his face as if seeing him for the first time. "I judged you poorly, Danny Carter. When you first arrived, I looked at your body and saw weakness. I looked at your size and saw someone who could not fight, could not contribute, could not matter." She bowed her head, a gesture of respect that Danny had never seen her offer to anyone. "I did not look at your mind, I did not see your true strength." Danny felt heat rise to his cheeks. He did not know what to say, so he said the first thing that came to his mind. "It is okay, I am used to being underestimated." Lifted her head, and a rare smile crossed her copper features. "Perhaps that is your greatest weapon." They stood together in comfortable silence for a time, watching the celebration swirl around them. Warriors danced and sang. Children ran between the legs of their elders, squealing with joy. Old veterans shared stories of battles long past. Life had returned to the settlement, and with it hope for the future. The Federation ship arrived a week later. Danny saw it first, a bright star descending through the purple sky, leaving a trail of white exhaust behind it. He had finally managed to repair the emergency beacon using components salvaged from the ancient machines, and the signal had reached a passing patrol vessel. The officers who came down in the shuttle were surprised by what they found. They had expected desperate survivors, broken refugees clinging to life on a hostile world. Instead, they found a thriving alliance between humans and a settlement protected by technology that should not have existed, and two humans who had become heroes to an entire civilization. As Danny walked toward the shuttle, stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. Her grip was gentle despite her enormous strength, careful not to bruise his fragile human body. "They will remember what you did," she said. "Our children will sing songs of the small human who woke the sleeping machines. Our scholars will study your notes and learn to use the other gifts you discovered." She paused, and something warm flickered in her golden eyes. "And if you ever return to our world, you will always have a place among us. You will be welcome in our homes and at our tables." Danny felt a lump form in his throat. He had come to this world by accident, a cargo specialist on a doomed freighter who had crashed in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had expected to die in the desert, forgotten and alone. Instead, he had found something he had not known he was looking for: purpose, belonging, proof that he was more than what others saw when they looked at him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "for giving me a chance." Grinned, showing her white teeth. "Thank you for being too stubborn to accept failure." She released his shoulder and stepped back. "Go well, Danny Carter, and remember that you are always the meaty one in here." She her temple with one copper finger. Danny laughed and wiped his eyes. "I will remember." He walked up the ramp into the shuttle and found a seat beside Pete. The big man was already strapped in, his injured arm cradled against his chest. He looked at Danny with tired but happy eyes. "Hell of an adventure," Pete said. Danny looked out the window as the shuttle lifted off. He watched the settlement grow smaller below them, the red rock and the metal gates and the towers where guards had once looked down at him with pity. He watched until it disappeared into the distance, swallowed by the endless orange sands of Prime. "Yeah," he said quietly, "hell of an adventure." The shuttle climbed higher, breaking through the atmosphere and entering the cold silence of space. Somewhere out among those stars, Danny knew, there were other worlds waiting to be explored, other challenges waiting to be faced, other chances to prove that humanity was more than muscle and bone, that the true strength of their species lay in their minds and their hearts and their stubborn refusal to give up. He had been the small one, the fragile one, the consolation prize that no one had wanted. But he had shown them all what a human could do.